We need to do a couple graphs here real quick. Conservation, sorry.
Oh, that's an N?
Yeah. Conservation. Okay, I have a little graph here, 2 axes. We're gonna put time on the bottom axis, and then the number of organisms here on the y-axis. So back in the, I wanna say 70s, somebody had the bright idea, maybe it was earlier. There was a big island out in the Aleutians, I don't remember which one, but they thought, oh, look at this would be a great spot to raise a bunch of caribou. And so they went and they got a bunch of caribou from the mainland and they brought it over to the big old island in the Aleutians and they turned the caribou loose. Do you think they brought over thousands and thousands of caribou or like a dozen? A dozen, yeah. So the population was really small at first, right? But then what happens over time? Yeah, all the caribous have little babies, and the caribou numbers go up and 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 up. Are there any like predators to like eat the caribou? No. So the numbers kept going up and up and up. When you have more caribou, that means you can have more babies, right? So it goes faster and faster and faster. What type of growth is this? Exponential.
Well, did the island ever reach a species cap?
I think they all died out, actually. They ate like all the food on the island and then just all starved to death. It was a huge crash. Of note, there's no such thing as continual exponential growth. All exponential growth has to run out at some point because animals have to run out of, or resources in general. Some sort of resource they'll run out of. So nothing can grow exponentially forever. But it's called exponential because like if I were to graph y equals x squared, it would look kind of like this, right? Where it has to some power. It might not be exactly y equals x squared, like this curve could be y equals 0.3x to the 1.4 power or something. But the idea is that you can match an exponent function to this shape curve. Okay. In reality, most growth does something else, especially in the long run. So most species will start off just a few and then it'll go up and up. But then what happens after there's a bunch of that species? It reaches some sort of cap, yeah. Sometimes it goes like, it shoots up really high and then bounces down and then kind of like fluctuates and then kind of finds its happy medium. Other times it just goes up and then just goes directly there. Either way, there's this like hypothetical maximum. Like an asymptote in math, right? This type of growth is called logistical growth. And it's where it meets that maximum level. What's the maximum level called for a population? We talked about it in the video. Humans have a theoretical one of these. We're not sure what level it is. Yeah, carrying capacity is the term. No, so again, we're not sure what the carrying capacity is for planet Earth for humans, right? And it probably depends on our culture, right? So like, you know, how many kids we want to have, all that sort of stuff, but also like how many resources we want per person, like how much of the environment do we want turned into like apartments and farmland? You know, do we want to like, can we fit 100 billion people? Well, probably, but that might mean that there's, you know, no more like moose running around. Everyone's just, you know, and maybe people don't even eat beef anymore. Maybe we have to eat all just plants. So it kind of depends on what our priorities are. So that's why the human carrying capacity is kind of unknown. However, if you're fish and game, and you want to like manage for a certain population, you usually manage to try and keep their population where on this curve?
A little bit below? Yes. A little bit.
Well, the problem is if you have to keep them right here, how long does it take for the population to bounce from this point up to like just a little bit higher? A long time, right? So if you're fishing game and you're like, oh, the point is for lots of people to go out and get moose, that's the priority. Where on this curve do you want to keep the population level?
Higher.
Well, if it's right at the top, and then someone goes out and hunts 10 animals, all of a sudden you're way back here and you set it back 5 years, right? My point is it takes a long time for the population to grow that last little bit. So where do you want the population level at? Above the line? You're going to be waiting a long time. You're going to have to say no hunting at all, and then it still might not get above the line, right? So yeah, it would be great if there was that many, but the point is you're trying to maximize the number of animals that can be harvested every year, right?
Same quality?
What?
But the same quality, like say there's so many that they just become scrawny.
Yeah, we don't even care about that. We just want to maximize the number that can be harvested every year. So where on this population curve are the maximum number of babies being born?
Oh, we went like at the beginning.
The steepest part of the curve here, right? This is the level that when Fish and Game that says how many moose do we want in interior Alaska, actually well below the carrying capacity, about half, because that's their maximum. They get good eating, right? They're not starving and scrawny because we manage them pretty well. In other places, like some of the islands in Washington that I visited, they don't allow hunting of deer, and the deer just like run wild, and they're always like at their carrying capacity and starving, because that's just their maximum level. But the moose around here eat pretty good. You don't see like skinny, hungry moose. The reason why you don't see a ton of moose around is because people go out and hunt them. So that's just a little aside that this is like the managed level. For places like Alaska for a highly harvested species. Other species in Alaska do something a little different. We're gonna do the same thing here. Time, number. You guys are hunted, but it's not the major pressure on them. They're gonna start off really small and they're gonna go up really fast because these are hares. Hare population goes up and up and up. As the hare population goes up, what eats the hare?
Fox.
Yeah, fox, but and in fact, fox are generalists enough they can hunt other things. The species the lynx is the famous one here. Although there are relationships with lots of other ones. The lynx population, if there's more and more hare, are there going to be more and more lynx? Yeah, but there's a lag time, right? So it's going to kind of follow a few years later. But wait a minute, the lynx population is really high. It's gone up. So what happens to the hare population? It goes down, yeah. So the hare population goes, oh no, we're all getting eaten by lynx, and it goes down, plummets, meow. And then the lynx population, oh no, there's no more hare. What happens to the lynx population? Yeah, they all starve to death, meow, it goes back down, right? And then the cycle just repeats. It makes this like nice sine curve. This absolutely happens in Alaska if they track the lynx and hare population. If you see a bunch of hares getting hit on the side of the road, and see a bunch of hares all over the place, 4 or 5 years later, you might see a bunch of lynx everywhere.
Why don't they let us hunt deer on the islands of Washington?
It's just like some of the islands. I don't know, because I don't know. Don't look at me. Sorry. Because not all people want all hunting everywhere. I mean, most of Washington you can hunt deer, but I don't know, you can't hunt moose in downtown Fairbanks.
Yeah, it depends on
You can bow hunt, I guess. Okay. It's coming right for us. All right. What are some of the limiting factors for for a population size.
Food.
Space.
Food. Wait, what type of growth is the hair and this graph?
I don't know, cyclical growth. We don't have a label for it.
Predators.
That's low.
Yeah, so food, predators.
Space.
What do you mean by space?
Territory it can have for itself.
Well, what's the whole point of having like an area that's yours, like a territory, is to eat the food that's there, right?
Well, then sometimes, like for some birds, it's to have a territory for mating.
Yeah, no, some actually need mates as well. And then speaking of birds, what do birds need to build?
Nests.
Nests. So you're right, space does come into factor, but it's usually, space usually is referred to as, just territory in general, which has things like food and mates and etc. The one exception for space might be if you need a particular shelter type, right? So like bats in a cave on a certain roost, or birds that have a certain like nesting site. I'm gonna put shelter. But it applies to things like bird nests, stuff like that. Let's come with a couple more. What else?
Luck.
Luck.
We'll ignore luck for now.
Water?
Water, yep. Definitely a limiting sort of thing.
Other like same as the species, more species. Other species.
Yeah, other species might compete for these sorts of things and push you out. What was that? Ooh, climate. Yeah, climate tolerance. I like that. There's one that they mentioned when they were talking about human carrying capacity, how our carrying capacity rose when we stopped like living in our own feces and we developed sewer systems. Whoa, how does that help us?
Disease.
Yeah, we don't have as much disease, right? If the caribou are all living really close to each other and eating grass that's right next to their own feces, are there going to be more disease or less disease than if they're all spread out?
More disease.
Yeah, more disease. So as you get more of them packed in an area, you get more disease generally for most species.
Like corn kernel and mudboard.
Is there a corn kernel?
Mudboard.
No. Oh, up there. Yeah. That's my drawing one. Cool. All right, moving on. We need to talk about biodiversity. Mick, just get what you can. Right what you can. Biodiversity. So, simply put, biodiversity includes either like the number of species, but sometimes biodiversity can also include things like the genetic variability or genetic diversity. What's an example of a place with really low biodiversity?
Desert.
Yeah, deserts naturally have relatively low biodiversity. Deserts and the Arctic, again, because there's like low resources. Extreme environments mean only so many species have adapted to those spots. What about a place that artificially has low diversity?
City.
Terrarium.
Yeah, things like cities, places where people are. People kind of ruin a lot of the like. So either it could be a city, parking lots, whatever. But also even something like farmland, right? If I go out there and I bulldoze all the trees down, and then I just plant, corn and put in a bunch of weed killer. Yeah, it's natural in the sense there's a bunch of plants growing, but it's all the same plant, right? Is my genetic diversity very high?
No. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So these are places with like low. I mean, it's not terrible. We need farmland. We need to eat. Like, we need cities and housing and parking lots, right? To some degree. But as a general rule, the biodiversity is really low where there's people. where's a place with high biodiversity?
Jungles.
Yeah, jungles, rainforests, even temperate forests. Is a general rule. Remember how we talked about like the beavers and how like the beavers move in and they like build a dam? Does the biodiversity go up or down when the beaver builds the dam? Yeah, up, right? So like the beaver builds the dam. And then like the water moves in, you know, the water table changes a little bit, which allows, you know, shrubs and marshes and wetlands, and the trees are there. You know, and then the animals have protection from, you know, the forest fires, things like that.
So what would happen if a human builds a dam like a beaver does and just lives there instead? Like a house?
Yeah.
That'd be a homeless land refuge.
I don't know. I suppose you could.
We wouldn't have the same. We wouldn't have different species of humans. There isn't such a thing.
The idea is that a nice, remember they said that like a little bit of chaos is good. Chaotic environments, natural environments usually have a little bit more genetic diversity, or a little bit more biodiversity in general, right? Where you have like a bunch of strange, like natural, like marshy areas and things like that. Yeah, jungles have lots of biodiversity. Okay, so what are some direct benefits to people? Sorry, it says benefits. What are some benefits to people, and I'm talking like straight up monetary benefits, to having areas of high biodiversity?
Tourism.
Or relatively like undisturbed areas. So there might be tourism, for sure. People come to Alaska just to look at whales, right? If all the whales are gone, like maybe they won't come anymore.
Hunting, yeah.
Or yeah, tourism. Yeah, I'll put like hunting, food.
Research,
What do you mean research?
like scientific experimentation, such as watching patterns to see how like animals behave and see how we can apply that to ourselves.
Oh yeah, for sure. So there's more animals to do research on.
Variety in carpets.
Carpets?
Carpets.
What do you mean carpets?
Animal carcasses.
Yeah.
We'll put that with hunting / food.
Cool flowers.
Put flowers with tourism. Just if it's pretty out, right? More people are likely to come as well.
Farms.
Pretty natural environments. What was that?
I'd say farms.
What about farms?
This natural biodiversity of the ground is so rich.
Yeah, more nutrients actually. I like that. Yeah, there'll be more nutrients in the soil as well as cleaner.
Air.
Yeah, clean air / water. In addition, that research, another aspect of this that people are really concerned about is if a species goes extinct, and especially before we like get it genetically cataloged, we lose all of its like all of the genes that are in it, right? And some of those genes, especially for plants, can code for like pharmaceuticals, right? So I wrote that kind of small. It just says pharma, PHARMA, pharma. So like, finding a new medicine.
That is true.
We find these new medicines from all these plants all the time. So the less plants that are in the world, the less options we have for medical benefits. Or it doesn't even have to be medical. It could just be some new species of whatever that is able to be commercialized or harvested or grown for meat or as a pet or whatever. Yeah.
But doesn't that mean there's also less likelihood for like diseases? There's less biodiversity.
Correct. Yeah. So less disease.
We'll be able to find the medicine for those diseases that are in the low.
Let's take out the problem. There's no point in
And when we think about things like clean air and water, guys, there is a shocking number of people that are killed every year just from air pollution. So it's absurd. Something like 20% of all deaths can be linked back to air pollution. Having clean air, as a general rule, will reduce health costs. So
Lower money
for healthcare, yeah. Lung cancer rates in Fairbanks are higher than they are in the national average. Why?
Because of the coal mines, burning wood.
It's mostly the wood and the coal power plants and the fact that we have the inversion layer and we have all this particulate pollution in Fairbanks in the winter. Yeah. So the winter months drive up the amount of like lung cancer and stuff like that occurs here in Fairbanks. Costs Fairbanksans millions every year in extra healthcare bills, right? Just the way it is.
Why do you live here still?
Why do we live here still? Right, it's only in those like few months, right? But also like asthma rates are higher, stuff like that. There's downsides everywhere you live. There's no perfect place. All right. Let's talk about some ecology problems.
Ecology?
Sorry, so ecological issues. So what are some problems that can mess up like a habitat or an ecosystem? How?
Natural disasters.
Let's leave the natural disasters because they're natural enough.
Electrical fire.
An electrical fire?
Acid rain. Lightning strike.
Acid rain is a type of what? Big, back it up. Big group is? Where acid rain comes from? Yeah, pollution. Yeah. So pollution in general, yeah. I'll just put pollution here. There are a lot of types of pollution. You can get acid rain. Acid rain actually levels have gone down way down in the US because we've gotten pretty good at anyone who has like a smokestack of a certain like size has to be tested for the particulates that turn into acid into the clouds. So our acid rain levels have gone way down. It is still an issue in other countries though.
Like China, like China?
Yeah, developing country, probably more so, yeah, there. So we have acid rain. There's another type of pollution I want to cover. Shh, guys. There's the obvious like smog, air pollution, whatever. There's lots of types of pollution. You're all aware of pollution. Even things like plastic pollution is an issue. But I want to cover a few you might not be aware of. One is called eutrophication.
Isn't that one thing to go
Into ants?
No, I feel like I know this one.
Eutrophication. E-U-T-R-I. Fication.
What is it?
So it's when you have farmland. We'll draw a little picture here. So here's your crop.
What does the other word say?
Acid rain, eutrophication.
On the top?
Pollution, ecological issues. I just put issues. So when you have a farm, oftentimes you add fertilizer, and the fertilizer is a good thing. It helps the plants grow really well. The problem is, at some point it rains, and then it drains all that pollution down into a lake or an ocean or someplace like that. And again, you think, oh, fertilizers in themselves aren't toxic, right? They aren't terrible. What happens though is that fertilizers allow for a big like population boom in the primary producers in the water, which are often algae, right? Again, you think, oh, more algae means more food for the other microorganisms. The problem is that, well, it does a couple things. Yeah, it can block sunlight. the algae produce oxygen at first when they're growing, right? The problem is it's a big bloom. It happens really quickly. So there's a big explosion. Question?
I'm like, don't they eat up all the oxygen?
Yeah, so the oxygen levels, algae makes oxygen, right?
When they die.
So the O2 levels go up at first and then it crashes. And all of the bodies of the algae that's just grown start to decompose. And when they do that, they suck the oxygen out of the water. Oxygen levels go way down. What happens to the little fish? Yeah, all the little fish, they just basically suffocate in their own ocean.
That's why they need to learn how to walk. For real, breathe air.
But that would be amphibians.
That's their problem.
Yeah, get wrecked.
Water's underrated.
Anyway, the point is, this is a big issue in like the Gulf of Mexico, right? Where like the Mississippi will like drain a bunch of the water. It just means we have to kind of control like how much,
Isn't it called the dead zone or something?
yeah, the dead zones, yeah, where the low oxygen levels will kill off a bunch of the fish. It means we just have to be careful with fertilizer and like the water runoff areas because it adds up. One more thing you guys might not be aware of is called biomagnification. Has anyone heard of biomagnification? Also called bioaccumulation.
Yes.
What's that? No? Okay, so this one happens with toxins that are, things like heavy metals, stuff like that, right? So if there's a little bit of heavy metal in the water, like mercury or something like that, the algae comes along and it grows and it might soak up a little bit of the mercury. Is it enough mercury to kill the algae? No, it's fine. But then some like other little plankton come along. And remember what happens when you go up a trophic level? How many times more biomass do you need to eat to survive on that second trophic level? Yeah, 10 times, right? So each one of these eats 10 times as much algae. It gets 10 times as much of the little heavy metal, mercury in this case, like 10x, right? It gets concentrated in their bodies because they can ingest it, but they can't process it and like remove it very well. And then all of a sudden a fish comes along, like the little tiny fish, they eat it,
100.
right? It becomes 10 times stronger.
What is that? 100.
Little fish, sorry.
Oh.
And then a big fish comes along. There's always a bigger fish. Well, who likes to eat tuna? I do. So then comes the humans. Yeah, well, the issue is that, yeah, it's actually many levels. So, especially in some of these ocean systems, you can have, yeah, a dozen trophic levels before it hits humans. Even in our simple example here, you have 10,000 times the concentration of, mercury than you had over here. That being said, is it like a bad idea to eat fish?
No, it's actually very good
Oh,
for you.
it's actually very good for you. Yeah, in fact, they've done a study on this. Even though mercury levels are really high in fish, like tuna, that are like apex predators that humans then eat, and mercury will affect your brain power, and eating too much like heavy metals like that will actually like make you dumber.
What fish makes
Fish oil counteracts it. It makes you smarter more than the mercury makes you dumber. So yeah, you should eat fish.
That's why my
Yeah.
family always gathers before it becomes winter.
Yeah, and the fish in Alaska are relatively good. Like they don't have a ton of pollution, but it is an issue. Like again, as our salmon go and travel and hang out in waters near other countries that don't have as many rules about amount of mercury in the water, we pick it up and bring it back. Anyway, that's biomagnification. Two other issues. One of the main ecological issues is overexploitation.
humans?
Yeah, like overfishing, right? This comes down to oftentimes just the tragedy of the commons. Have you guys heard of that before? It's the concept of like back in the day they had the common ground, which was like a field near the middle of town, and so here's like the field, and then here's like all the little houses. This is back in like, I don't know, colonial days.
Colonial day.
Yeah.
Like, do they all get together and just-
Yeah, and it was like this public space, but it was a big grassy field area. People could hang out there, like it's like a park type thing, but it wasn't an official park. It was like regulated in rules. It was just empty space, right? And anyone could use it. The problem was, if one person brought their cow over and the cow ate a bunch and like pooped somewhere, it wasn't a big deal, right? But what happens when one person brings like 20 cows over and another person brings 20 cows over and another person brings 20 cows over, like, and then someone else brings their sheep? Yeah, then all the grass is dead and there's just poop everywhere and it's this big like poop field with no grass or whatever, right? The point is, like, it's a shared resource that anyone has access to. Humans are pretty good about ruining those, right? You know why you don't have doors on your bathrooms? No, there's no doors like walking into the bathroom. Right? There used to be doors, but too many people were vaping, and so they removed the doors to make it easier to catch kids who are vaping. Like it's just a shared resource that kind of gets ruined by a few bad actors, right?
Doors are very nice resources, guys.
What's an example of a fishing stock that's been like overfished and then crashed? Some of the tuna, maybe. What else? Salmon in Alaska.
Yeah.
There are a couple that are like kind of unquestionable. Like we're doing like the run for kings. We have a contract with Canada that we have to allow so many kings up into like the Yukon territories, and we've been failing like every single year in allowing that many kings to go up. So again, it's a tragedy to commons, but the people lower down on the river kind of have like first dibs in the sense of like, if the first village on the river takes all the fish out, like there's no fish going up. So it's this shared resource that has to go up the whole river. Yeah.
It's kind of like when one person does something wrong, it ruins it for everybody else.
Yeah. Except it might not just be one person, it's like everyone, or multiple people, or groups, or companies, or things like that too. Alaska and the US is a little bit better about this, Alaska especially. But we do have our disasters, like the king crab fishery crashed. You can't get a bunch of king crab down out of Kodiak anymore. So there's the danger of like doing that like maximum sustained yield is a little shift in like climate or something like that can really throw off your numbers, and it's easy to overexploit these. Anyway, shared resource, big issue is how there's only so many fish out there. How they're allocated is a big concern.
So then what do you have to control the people who use them?
Yeah, so either you need to have a government step in and be like, hey guys, let's share this. Here are the rules. Sport fish gets this many, commercial fishermen get this much, personal use, subsistence get this much. Or you need to have like a group of fishermen agree to like help each other out and be like, all right, look guys, let's not all go fishing every day, all day. How about half of us go out on these days, another half go out on these days? So some of those like commercial fishing groups do that sort of thing too. Anyway, something to think about. Some species just get totally wiped out. In fact, some species go extinct, right? Any examples of things getting hunted to extinction?
Elephants.
Dodo, what?
Rhinos.
Rhinos, some of the rhinos, yeah. Any others?
Elephants.
Woolly mammoths were probably hunted to extinction, yeah.
Elephants too.
White tigers, maybe. Yeah, a bunch. There's lots of examples, right, where we just like straight up eat a thing into extinction. Have you guys heard of the Steller sea cow? It was like an Arctic manatee, like this giant Arctic manatee thing that used to live like out kind of by the Aleutians or like Russia and stuff. Guys, hey, shh. The Steller sea cow is this like giant Arctic manatee, and like the guy who discovered Bering Strait, like Vitus Bering or whatever his name is, he's stopped somewhere, found a bunch of these. They're like, oh, these things are delicious, and they hunted a bunch of them, and then like ever since then, nobody's found them. Like they're extinct now. He probably wiped out the last population that had already been on decline for a while. Anyway, overexploitation.
Maybe that they're hiding, and then we just can't see them.
Habitat loss, again, people building buildings, but also not only habitat loss, but I mentioned this earlier when we were outside. You also get things like fragmentation. If you have a forest and the black bear is hanging out in the forest doing pretty good, excuse me, but then all of a sudden you make, like a highway through the middle of it. I mean, the forest is still basically just as big, square miles wise, like acreage wise, but there's a big highway right through the middle of it. What was that?
You only put a grenade instead of the highway.
No. Humans are, question? Okay. Humans are really good about fragmenting natural habitats by building all these roads and highways and canals and whatever else. So yeah, they build squirrel bridges, or you don't see these in Alaska very often. There are some places, but they're actually pretty common in lower 48 on the big highways, right? If there's like natural habitat on one side, natural habitat on the other side, what they'll do is they'll build a bridge over the highway. And then what do they put on the bridge? Well, they just put grass and stuff, right? So it's this natural like way to travel from one to the other.
Put grass in the water road.
They just let it go wild after they just put some dirt on there, plant some grass, and then let it go wild. The idea being that it acts as a corridor for a species to cross from one side to the other without getting smushed by a semi. Okay. So these are some common problems. Let's come up with some solutions. We already talked about like corridors. We already talked about the corridors between habitats. To try and connect to like between fragments for organisms. This also works, guys, this also works on a bigger scale too. Like if you want animals to be able to migrate from like Southern California up to Northern California, then you need some wildland areas like for them to stop at along the way. If they're like birds or insects or whatever, right? The monarch butterfly, you need to be able to like, have a wild spot for it to like stop at. So if you separate those by like too many hundreds of miles, like it's all of a sudden 1,000 miles and the monarch can't fly that far, it'll just die. So you need to make sure there's a corridor of some type for animals to travel if they need to travel. What are some other solutions to some of our like problems we had, like pollution and stuff? Yeah, parks, so we can preserve habitat. Hold on. And what's cool in the U.S. is we have a lot of levels of like preserving habitat, right? Can you hunt in a national park?
Yes.
You can go into Denali National Park and go hunting?
If it jumps in the road, it's fair game. Mr. Marcotte, it's not my fault the moose jumps in front of my car.
Is a general rule,
And your life, right?
you can, the buffer zone has a lottery, but not in the park itself. So, guys, hey, shh. The national parks are like our highest level of like pristine, hands-off, don't mess with it type stuff. But do we have things like national monuments, national forests, things like this? Yeah, we do.
There's national forest?
Yeah, they're national forests. Yeah. I don't know, around.
Where? Around the nation.
No, all over. There's national forests. Guys, hey, shh. My point is, not all conservation has to be 100% do nothing with it, right? Wildlife refuges. Does that mean you can't hunt in a wildlife refuge?
Yeah.
You can hunt in a wildlife refuge, right? the point of the wildlife refuge is it's a general place for that population to like hang out and not just be totally wiped out and killed. So the habitat itself is preserved, right? Which is way more important for a species than just never being like shot at or chased around by people. Okay, so you can preserve habitat, you can create corridors between fragments. What else can we do? Solutions. Like on what? We're not even worried about hunting anymore. Don't worry about the hunting. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Just in general protection. Against overexploitation. Yeah, again, we want to protect against overexploitation. Again, if there are no rules at all, then people will just go out and like totally use up and kill every single resource that they can make money off of, right? Because that's human nature. So it's important to have some rules
If you can make money,
in place.
take your chances and kill.
What else? What can we do against like some of our other problems?
With like how forests go through like a natural burn cycle, like your forest have you don't do that anymore, and you burn, they burn really violently, like in California.
Yeah, so like allowing like natural burns to occur. Did you have one?
We become Amish.
Amish.
Mass Amish.
So burning, guys, hey, shh, 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 shh. Burning I'm gonna put under the broad category of restoring things back to their natural habitat. I was down in Washington last week, visiting my dad, he's 70 years old. And we went.
Hey guys.
Okay, we went and visited where this little creek comes out into the ocean. The creek in the past had this big like industrial factory nearby, and they built this artificial lake, and then the creek like drained into the ocean using a culvert. Just like, it wasn't a very natural environment. And they had a bunch of like equipment there and machinery there, and were tearing everything out. Why were they doing that? Put it back to much more how it was, right? So this would be under like habitat restoration. Yeah, so instead of just preserving it, but then once it's used, just say, all right, well, that was a parking lot once, that means it has to be a parking lot forever. They went, oh, let's put this back to a more natural state, and it'll be beneficial for the local like bird and fish species and stuff, yeah.
Have they ever like tried to restore like war zones? Like say the forest was hot over then, like the forest was.
Yeah, it's a big issue. We dumped a bunch of like Agent Orange in Vietnam and stuff, and it's like still like killing plants and stuff. Yeah, some really nasty stuff.
Agent Orange.
Yeah. Yeah, war zones are an issue. We can reduce pollution just in general.
Mass conversion.
Again, US is pretty good about this, but we can always be a bit better. It's not only your fault that like, you know, the McDonald's cup gets thrown on the ground or something like that, but it's also McDonald's fault for like making the cup in the first place, right? So we've been brainwashed into thinking that pollution, like you don't want to be a litter bug because it's all your fault, but it's actually the big companies that have kind of convinced us that it's okay for them to make a bunch of trash. It's not okay for you to allow it to get in the environment.
Like plastic is designed to just last forever.
Yeah, plastic's pretty terrible.
Just ban plastic and just revert back to part of it.
Super expensive, hard to do thing. Like, how are you gonna buy like a chicken from the store or something without plastic? There are ways around it. Like you can totally reduce your plastic footprint, and I'd encourage you to do that. But
They can go back to World War I. You know, everything been rubber and metal.
yeah, but there's also like diseases and stuff. There are good reasons for plastic, but we can reduce our plastic a lot.
Biodegradable plastic too.
Yeah, some are biodegradable. It's pretty cool.
No more plastic toys.
Oh, I forgot one over here. Sorry. I forgot one of the big issues. One of the big ecological issues. What's the story with the cane toads? Cane toads are a
Cannibal.
invasive species. So there's cane toads. What's another example of an invasive species?
Mongooses.
The mongoose that they brought in to kill the snakes, which they brought in to, like, that were attacking the birds. Yeah.
Feral cats in Australia.
Cats, yeah, house cats, feral cats, really bad everywhere. Yeah. Vetch, we have vetch in Alaska. Goldfish can be an invasive species.
Chickenweed.
Asian carp, what?
And lion there is a ridiculous amount of mosquitoes and a ridiculous amount of wild chickens.
The chickens and the mosquitoes are both invasive species. Yeah. Any other examples?
Wolves in the Denali Park.
Wolves in Denali, they're invasive.
Yeah, because they took them out and went to pop back in. Everything in the Denali side.
Actually, we should take a look at that because when you reintroduce like an apex predator that's like natural for the environment, it's often pretty good for the ecosystem. Yeah.
Are horses an invasive species as well in Europe?
I guess technically, yeah, they are. Yeah, horses in the U.S. are invasive species. Wild horses. Bunch of other really terrible ecological disasters like zebra mussels. Yeah, Asian carp totally wiped out like the Great Lakes area and their biodiversity. Oftentimes they're brought in by people. Pike, yeah.
Kangaroos invasive?
I don't know, maybe not. I was learning about this one guy. Hey, shh, shh, shh. This one guy thought it'd be fun to have every single species mentioned in William Shakespeare's plays, like in the United States, and so he like brought over starlings, and now there's just like bajillions of invasive starlings in the U.S. So people just moving stuff around on purpose. It's like a little bird, but it's like a little bird, but they're aggressive. It's still invasive. It's still an ecological disaster. They poop everywhere.
Exactly.
Sorry, my last thing here for solutions, we'll call it good with this, is to reintroduce or reintroduce usually like top predators, but natural species. The big success story is Yellowstone National Park. There were no wolves in Yellowstone National Park because people basically hunted them all because wolves are dangerous and kill. They kill cows and stuff. And so people thought, oh no, let's get rid of the wolves. But then they realized, wait a minute, without the wolves, the bison were getting out of control, the deer were getting out of control, and they were like trampling everything. They were like eating all the vegetation. And when they reintroduced the wolves kept the bison out of like the field areas, and it allowed like the deer to like not take over everything and eat everything. And actually like the ecosystem is in a lot better like balance in place because they introduced the wolves.
Human intervention is good.
Yeah, but it's undoing our previous intervention, I guess, is kind of the point.
But now the wolves are going rampage and killing everything.
Yeah, so Alaska wolf control is a bit of an issue, like where they like want to like shoot some of the wolves to keep the populations high for like other species.
Yeah, you can.
No, hang on, no, we'll check them later. Yes. Hey, your group needs to turn in your lab sheet too if you haven't done that yet.
I emailed you about my.
I forgot to give you time. Yeah, I'll fix it.
Okay, and also, I'm not in the group class.
Oh, you should get in it.
We just start and